to your first founders talk. As we move forward through these talks, the goal is to have speakers who have us very interesting insights and experience, talk about a variety of topics that are important, that's going to be important to y'all in your journey. And so I'm really excited about the list that we're developing of individuals. So those will be really cool. But today, Ben and I want to focus on the customer, specifically the power of a customer persona. That's what we want to talk about today, right? And so in that conversation, we want to go through what it looks like, the power of the customer persona template, the understanding the different areas in the customer persona template, and then understanding how to get those answers addressed. And then last but not least, how to use the answers to help shape the product that you ultimately deliver to your folks. Ben, you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like understanding your customer, at least in our experience with successful companies and businesses and business leaders, understanding your customer is a never-ending journey. So it's not hard to look at a business, especially a startup, and to say you don't know your customer well enough. That's like a safe bet because you're just getting started, right? But the what we want to stress is how much it will speed up your progress the better you understand your customer. So it's a thing that you could get bogged down on and trapped in. So don't get trapped in perpetually trying to understand your customer without taking your next steps, but always be circling back to how can I learn my customer better? How can I expose their problems better? How can I understand their needs better and evolve with them? So
Yeah.
The tool that we have here, I think, will help guide some of your thinking and give you a template to keep tweaking and iterating and visiting again and again.
Yeah, so like Ben was saying, folks, like understanding the customer is obviously key. I mean, you cannot, unless you really understand your customer deeply, you are unable to deliver the appropriate level of value to them because as a result of you solving a problem or a high need of theirs, right? And you won't be able to walk them towards your product, onboard them into your product, and then keep them in your product if you don't really understand them well. And so we have a rally maker, John Karen, who has done some work at gigantic brands like Lipton Tea, who talk about even Lipton spent a lot of time in understanding their customers, because one of the things that they discovered is that their customers, like, things evolve, right? And everybody will talk about this, right? Like who your customer today will start to evolve tomorrow because of things that are outside of your control, or even as you start to solve their problem, right? Their needs will be evolving. So, as Ben was saying, you don't obviously you want to take in and spend time in customer discovery and making customer discovery a part of your daily process, but you need to put action to that and make those adjustments within your product. And brands who typically don't do that well tend to fade over time because their product or service becomes grossly unaligned with the needs of the customers over time, and it happens incrementally. And then one day they realize that they're far apart and they don't have a business. And so one of the things we wanted to walk through today is like, what is the customer persona? Kind of like talk about like our thoughts on that, and then dive into, like I said, each little area to make sure that we're explaining and that you have a full understanding of each area. Does that make sense? Everybody good with that? All right. So I'm gonna throw this thing up here real quick just so we can look at it really quickly. Um, but everybody has gotten this template, um, and so this template, I would say that initially, if you have customers or you have an idea of a customer, like the reality is that if you're delivering a product or service to out there in the marketplace, like the question is, could if I give you this template, could you answer these questions about your customer? And every business that's successful should, right? They should know some background demographic information. They should know some communication preferences. They should understand the goals of the customer, the buying journey of their customer, challenges, objection, fears. What are the expectations that they received, and then the purchase criteria. So, with that being said, I just want to just briefly get a show of hands. Like, how many folks on this call feel like you, if you that you know those boxes for your customer? Okay.
Depends on the customer segment. We've got multiple customer segments identified.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah,
And
I would say I have like 3 archetypes, people just in different stages of their life, and have, I would probably fill out 3 of those templates.
okay. All right. And then the question becomes, how I'm curious, how, for those who raise your hand, how do you feel, what's your level of confidence in saying, like, this is absolutely my customer? Like, I know their biggest fears without a shadow of a doubt. Like, with confidence, scale 1 being least confident, 10 being the most confident. Where are you at on those scales? Sam, Charlie, Morgan?
I would say I'm like a 6 or 7. I'm not totally convinced because I haven't actually, put it in writing, given them a survey. That would give me a lot more confidence. But I do interact with my customers, and I just see how they respond to blog posts and social media, and try to pay attention.
Yeah. What about you, Morgan?
So we know it better for our school because that's what we have more fully developed. So the students who are attending, I would say a 5 because we can like really easily see the data on who we're attracting. And we're currently having one of our team members go through and speak with each student to kind of like follow this template and pull some of that out. But for our other target segments, they're kind of being more developed, so we're not confident there.
Yeah. Sam, what about you?
Yeah, so I would agree with Morgan. In the sector of civil litigators that are suing on behalf of human trafficking victims, they close extremely quickly, and we're very clear on what they want. They want good digital evidence procurement to help support their cases and beat motions for dismissal in those cases. For federal and local law enforcement, I'd say we're probably between 3 and 5 on those, because we're getting lots of buy-in talking to their prosecutors, but the law enforcement investigators themselves are very frustrated with the current state of affairs and skeptical about something that's going to turn that current state of affairs on its head.
Okay.
So the thing that's cool about this template is, especially when you're starting up and you get those initial customer sets, it tends to be either because you have experience there, so you know what people want, or you're very intuitive and you've gotten into a couple conversations and you've exposed what they want. And then what happens is you very intuitively, because you're entrepreneurs, kind of follow that trail and go, who else is like that? What else? When you can take what you know intuitively about your customer and make it explicit in the form and start to really lay it out and look at it on paper, then you can start to structure it in channels, and you can go, oh, this is not a network of friends. This is not needs to be only a word of mouth campaign among like-minded people. I can find other people that fit in this circumstance. I can find other pockets. I can define where my channels are. And so sometimes, especially in the early stage, when we are moving very intuitively from experience or conversation, it can be helpful to take our intuition and make it explicit on paper so we can look at it and go, oh, here's a gap where I don't really know why they made this purchase. I just know that they do if I talk to people like this. Let me ask a couple of questions and expose when I find out that the woman who's my composting customer, her long-term goal is not really about her own viability, but it's about raising kids who are a certain way. So let me change my marketing from what she can accomplish to what her kids will accomplish. Let me put children in my images instead of women in my images. Where you didn't really know that until you got really explicit and started asking some specific questions and saw the gaps in what you know.
Yeah.
So the reason you guys are here and have got the companies as far is because you're very intuitive on sales and you can get things going quickly. In order to get to our next step, we want to encourage you to make it explicit, get it down on paper so you can see what you don't know. And then we can fill that in and really build out some robust profiles of multiple segments or just your best one, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. The key is, the reality is that all of you have to, in order to remain sustainable, you have to earn revenue, period. All right. And in order to earn, and you have to earn enough revenue, period. And so in order to get there, at some point, we have to get someone to pull the lever on a transaction that transfers money from their account to yours, right? And in order to get people to do that, people assume that that's a very easy thing, but actually it's a very challenging thing. And it's because of a lot of reasons that we will talk about, and Ben has talked about, where we are just either, we don't really we think that this is a need, and it could be a need, right? But it is not a need that they will pay for. People talk a lot about needs that they have, but and we can fall into the trap of thinking because they're talking about them all the time that they're willing to pay for it. But the battlefield is littered with people who have done it that way, and it's something that they're not willing to pay for at the end of the day. And so by doing this, and it's been the same, by making it explicit and going through this, what we're trying to identify is what are those things that will help us understand enough about this customer and in the right areas that will get them to pull the lever on you. And then once we build this profile of that customer, it's like, how can we take and scale this? Now we have a template on who we should target, right? And how, as he talked about, how we should talk to them and the images that we show them. It literally unlocks the entire picture for them. And so one of the things that you guys are doing is through what's called social listening, right? Like, or you survey them on some level, right? You're listening to their conversations and you're understanding their needs. And when we go through like the process of like, how do you identify these needs? You're either doing it through a focus group, right? You're getting a group of people in who you believe are your customers, and you're asking them a series of questions to tease out these responses. You're doing social listening, which you're doing listen to the blog posts, social media posts. You're doing keyword research, right? You're saying, okay, like what are other people saying about this in blogs and on the news and stuff like that. And then last but not least, like maybe you're surveying, right? You're sending out surveys to people who you think are your customers or currently your customers with questions that they fill out that help you gain a better picture. But the goal is to get the information in so that way, at the end of the day, you're able to answer the questions on that customer persona without a shadow of a doubt, right? And like, who are we to tell you what information is enough? If I say like, oh, you're just reading some blog posts, and my gut is like, that's not enough, right? But if you're having focus groups and you are sending out surveys and you're doing social listening and keyword, and you're adding your experience and all that kind of stuff, then over time you start to feel a certain level of confidence. And really what'll prove the fact that you have this figured out right is if people buy your product. If people don't, then you haven't figured it out. I mean, that's the reality, right? If someone's not buying what you're offering them, and it's then you don't have it figured out, right? So let's go through and let's just take a look at each one of these blocks and make sure that we are thinking and looking at these things appropriately, and then we can talk about ways to feel that you can do to get these blocks addressed. So let me open this back up. And personas, like this template, it says a person name. I think that's interesting. I think that what you have to do is when you think about this work, you have to think about it like this is a person, and it's good to put an image on a person. Matter of fact, there was this company called Omnimodal, which created an image around their customer, and it was very, very powerful. And so, just to have a person's name up there is really interesting. You can pick any name you want. But the first major block is background and demographics. Before I speak, Ben, do you have any insights or wisdom about background and demographics? How to think about this, approach this, view it?
No, I mean, I think that for each of you, it's going to be a little bit different. Like for Charlie, it's going to be different than it is for Sam. It's going to be different than it is for Morgan and Susan, because your customers are different. So Sam, it might be the person in the police department or the hospitality that's making the decision, and what motivates them to make the decision. For Susan and Morgan, it is the entrepreneur and the student, right? And so thinking as narrowly as you can about the actual decision maker will be helpful. It might be tempting to think about the organization, but organizations don't make decisions. Individuals inside organizations make decisions. And so as narrowly as you can understand what your actual procurement person, how they feel, what their struggle is, where they come from, what their background is, it'll help you in designing the product that solves their problem.
Yeah. I will add that the background and demographic information is also is like, if you look at like some of them, like age, sex, income, I mean, there's a part of this that feels like people tend to push back on it because, and I'll give you an example of this. Like you say, well, wait, watch it. If you know what, I'll just flat out say it. Like sometimes it feels like discrimination. It's like marketers are targeting people based on age, sex, and income. The reality is that is true. An example of that is when I was doing Education Learn Jelly, which is a service that I provide to elementary teachers. What I found was that teachers who were in their 45 and above, I had a hard time convincing them to implement a product that had coding in it, right? And I found that I got more traction with younger users. And so if I was to make a choice about these dollars that I have and who am I going to spend it with to gather the low-hanging fruit that could potentially get me to the next level, it was going to be, I'm going to spend it with a younger teacher because I can get more for my dollar. And then the younger teacher will be in a place to then come alongside of the teacher who is older. And so that was just me making a smart decision. And then the other thing I realized is that women were gravitated more towards my product than men. And so those two factors, age and sex, played a big role in how I marketed my product, and the way I talked to them and who I targeted. And so understanding that information like really matters. Like understanding that I was talking to a younger female teacher, one of the things I had to be careful about was like the images I used, the language I used. It helped me direct dollars in the appropriate way into the right channels, right? And so that's why understanding very granularly who the background and the demographics of your customer is important. And then the other one is income. Like if you realize like the person you're targeting income is too low to be able to afford your product, then you're talking to the wrong market. So understanding income is important because it understands like what's their price tolerance around this, and then typically how do they view things. And so all of these areas really matter, and they're going to vary with each one of you. They're going to vary with each one of you as you go down this pathway. And then the other thing I want to say, and I'm just going to open it up questions around this block, is that I would recommend that for all of you, like the goal right now is to put all your customers on the table, those who you currently have and those who you think could potentially be customers, and do a separate persona for all of them. And for us to figure out who's the low-hanging fruit at the end of this journey that we can use as a launch pad to the other people. And so so fill out multiple templates for this for all the customers you currently believe are your customers, and then people who you hope that could be your customers or you think that could be your customers. Do one for this. So any questions along the lines for background and demographics? Anybody have any questions or comments on this?
Yeah, you mentioned a couple times you're talking about government or large organizations that may contain that individual person you're trying to get to. One of the things that I've come across is that a lot of times the procurement person who signs the checks, he is in charge of a process, but doesn't interact with the value proposition at all, doesn't care, isn't interested in it. So he, as a persona, he is a decision maker in a way, but really he just manages the process and then takes inputs from the rest of the organization. Could you talk to that?
It's so interesting you brought that up, because we had a group, Omnimodal, had a similar challenge, right? The person who bought in to the concept of Omnimodal was an executive who had a broader, bigger vision. And then when they went to try to get it implemented, it got roadblocked by someone in procurement because there were other things.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say that knowing that difference is really important, and that we'll want to. It would be interesting to try and validate that works across agencies, so that's repeatable and not just the first one that you ran into. And then that's the kind of thing that makes it seem like that like some sort of freemium model is helpful to build an advocate among a user who has to advocate to someone else for the money to be spent. It makes me think of Dreamscape Squiggle Park that the parent that she sells learning platforms to kids, but their parents actually pay for it. But what she found is she was more successful if she created something the kids really wanted and then let the kids lobby the parents to pay for it. It seems like a similar situation where the practitioner needs to lobby the procurement officer to pay for it. So any way that you can that may change your strategy if you realize your real advocate is not the one in charge of the money. You give them an experience so they can really advocate well for what you're doing.
And I want to add to that, Sam, and that's what's interesting about this customer persona template, because that is one of the things in here, right? Which is a topic we'll hit on, which is a typical buyer's journey, right? So understanding the pathway, that the content that you need to provide them, how you need to provide them in the pathways to get that decision to ultimately be made, will include those components of it, like as you talked about, like, oh, there's this ultimate decision maker who makes the decision, but what are the things I have to do to make that decision go through? So I may have to talk to this department and provide them with this information. I may have to soothe this fear or assuage this fear as a in the process to ultimately get the trigger to be pulled on this. And so we'll talk about the buyer's journey more, but that's clearly the buyer's journey and understanding what is required to get that person to make a purchase.
But then who do you think in that case is better? Is it better to understand the procurement officer and that part of their journey is listening to the actual people who use the tool, or the customer is the person who uses the tool and part of his process is to convince the procurement? Like, who's better to focus on in background demographics, buyer's journey goals? The procurement person or the user of the tool?
That's an interesting question. I think that the it feels as though what I fundamentally come back to is like who ultimately makes the decision. Like in organizations and government organizations, that could be multiple people. You can get a mayor to say, yes, I want to do this, but then the procurement department holds back.
It feels like you're going to need to keep it on the procurement person and just know that the best way to convince them, because you're going to want to design it to fall within budget constraints that they have, in line with practices and procedures and the obligations that they have, because they're in the end the ones that have to approve the money and spend the money.
But he said something which is interesting, is that the procurement person, the value proposition may not align with what is a procurement, like, for example, like what is a procurement person? I mean, I shouldn't say what do they care about. Like, for example, Buddy Dyer had an initiative where they had the 3 pillars for the city to turn, for example, these community centers into learning, right? Just not warehouses where they put kids there, but we're actually learning, like platforms of learning, and reading was one of those components. And so there's already a motivation there. And then the question became, who do I target within the city in order to get my product placed in there? And what I ended up doing was I ended up talking to the directors of the center and pointing them to the directive of the mayor, and drawing that line and saying, I can help you get there. So I'm probably answering your question right now. It's like, you just got to figure out how to bring a vision in line with draw lines,
And that's why I think it's so interesting that you advise, Kyle, that we write down all the different customer persona types that we have, because all of this, it's bringing to mind all the, frustrating and, encouraging conversations that I've had in the government space. And then talking to civil litigators, the people that are making the decision, once you get to them, it's like 2 people that are involved in that decision process versus another decision process, another customer segment that's like 15 people involved in that decision-making process, which is why one closes faster than the other.
Yeah, so you have to take that into consideration. Like, ultimately, like I said, we're trying to get a snapshot, right? And you may look at that buyer's journey and say, this is too much weight attached to this. That's the reason why I got out of schools. I looked at it and I was like, I can't subject myself to all the stuff that I have to go through as a startup. I can go there in the future. If one comes, great, but that's not where I'm gonna focus at. And so hopefully the customer persona helps you get there. Guyana, I see you have a question. Go ahead, what's your question? Oh, you lower your hand.
It's kind of, I just wanted to agree with Ben that we started with persona just with the children. And after the first testing, we realized that the parents are not going to buy it because, okay, it's kind of solving the children's issue, but it's not the persona of parent, because in the end they are going to pay for it, and we mix it both. But still, we realized after launching the application that we need to have a persona for each age group, both children and parents. That's the way that we passed.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to like Julia. Like she had to meet the needs of the child. She had to meet the need of the teacher, and she had to meet the needs of the parents. And she had to be conscious about that in the how she delivered her product to people.
I think too, Guyana, with yours, one of the things we'll want to do as you're moving into new markets, so is really validate that what's true in Armenia and Russia carries over into the States, and then because you have customer traction, if we can validate that that's true, then the very next thing will be channels and how do you get to them through therapists.
Yeah.
Moto team, I was thinking that this stuff is going to be really important for you, especially with your garment producers, because it's such a you like your fashion line people that want to hire the factory, because it's so complex and there's so many different sizes and interests. And so for you all to uncover a niche in the fashion industry is going to be really important, and it's not apparent to people outside of the industry where that is exactly. Do you have some hunches on this first part of on who your person is that will hire the factory?
Yeah, that's we've been having a lot of discussion around that this week. We feel like for the global fashion entrepreneur side, we know that really well. I'm a very similar persona to that. So I was a person who was trying to start a sustainable fashion company, didn't know where to start with overseas manufacturing. So essentially we're trying to find people like me in America, and I know they exist, like they're in my friend group. But when we're looking at on the Ugandan side, we know that that customer is out there, but we kind of don't know how to work backwards to this customer persona to find exactly where they're at. Like I think on the Ugandan side, it's trickier to identify. So we know that there's Ugandan women who would like to be fashion entrepreneurs. We're just not sure where to find them yet. Like, does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. I mean, and you may have to, like, there definitely the motivations, like culturally, brands all the time market to different cultures different, right? And different groups different. I mean, for years, I mean, I thought it was horrible, but like McDonald's and all of them would they had like these divisions like African American where they would make commercials specifically for us, and they would be a little bit more jazzier, a little bit more whatever, and I was just like, this is the worst. But the important thing is that there are differences in people and cultures that we want to understand that drive their decision making that could be different from someone else, right? So I think that you would want to do a customer persona for Uganda women and one for your.
I think also I want to encourage you that I know it's hard and to find and to feel like we have friendship circles that validate it. But one of the things we want to caution you against, and part of the reason you're all on step one, is that building the product is way more fun than doing customer research. And so we can get out in front of ourselves on developing our company and get down the line, spend money and time on something that actually doesn't align with a sizable customer segment based on our healthy and responsible intuition. And so what I want to encourage you guys to do, as much as you're able to discipline yourselves, is to take some of your energy and put it into the harder work of getting what you're intuiting about your friendship group explicit on paper. And to not go, oh, it's hard to find them in Uganda, but we're sure they're there. We'll keep building it. And when they hear about us, they'll find it. let's validate our assumption that they're there. Let's keep being creative to find a way to validate our assumption or our intuition and get it explicit on paper. I just want to encourage you guys to put some energy into that work right now before you get out in front of yourself, because what happens is it gets lopsided then, and you can have these heavy products that don't have a customer segment, and that's when early stage companies trip over themselves and fall.
Very true. That's very true. Let's get to this next one, which is communication. I think this one is really, really somewhat is self-explanatory. I mean, the whole goal is like, look, we got to figure out where our people exist, what places, which then helps us understand like where do we need to talk to them at. And so with communications is really just like what associations, social networks are they involved in? What publication or blogs do they read? And I think the coolest part is that answering, getting this question answered will tell you what channels to go to, because you understand where they exist. So with each of you, you know, as you go through and you complete this, you should be saying or trying to find out, okay, like where are they at on social media, and then what percentage, or what you know, where are they the most, what blogs do they read, what publications they read, and behind as like I said, as a direct, like this is insight into like once you get ready to spend dollars, then you know exactly where to spend those dollars, right? Ben, do you want to add anything to this one?
No, that's right.
Yeah.
You got it.
Okay, cool. Goals. You know, like so you think about each of your products, right? Like some of the easiest ones, maybe one of the easiest ones is well, all of them I think are easy, but in terms of framing this box correctly is like, what are the goals that your customer has, right? And it's important to understand short-term, mid-term, long-term goals, because if you just stop at short-term, then once that goal has been satisfied, this is how attrition occurs, right? You like when you're trying to extend the LTV, the lifetime value of your customer, and you're trying to keep them engaging your product year after year after year, or subscription service as a subscription service, then you really need to understand, go past the short-term goals all the way to the long-term goals, and start to be developing and positioning your product in a way that can help them achieve that. A good example of this is QuickBooks. At the surface of QuickBooks, it's just an accounting at the base core of it. It's like let us keep track of your accounting, right? Debits and credits, right? Where a checkbook will give you a report. But if you look at how QuickBooks has developed that product, they are starting to address the long-term goals. The short-term goals, I need to figure out a way to keep track of my bank book to make sure I'm not going into the negative, right? The long-term goals is, oh, by the way, which QuickBooks begin to offer is like, oh, we have 1099 service, or we have all these other services that they tack on to it. And the reason why they tack on these other things is because they're looking long view. They're saying, okay, for the person who's a business owner, in the immediate, of course, they want to know if they have money or not, but longer range, the goal is for them to have a sustainable business. And in order to do that, I have to deliver products that address that holistically, right? And so with each of you, you want to be able to figure out, okay, what are the short-term goals? The short-term goals is to get rid of trash out of my house or compost. But then what are the midterm and what are the long-term goals associated with that, right? Ben, you have anything you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is within reason, right? So it's what are their goals in the sphere that relates to the problem that you've identified that your customer has. So it's not their long-term goals in life, but it's their long-term goals in the product. And I would say that is like subliminal in all of the communication with the customer segment. So to use Kyle's example, QuickBooks, when you see images, you go to their landing page and you look at their product, you don't see like a ledger, like here's what we're going to do for you balance your checkbook, you see like thriving, happy business owners doing their business, right? QuickBooks doesn't like sell the coffee and pass it across the counter for you, but when you go to their website, that's what you see, right? Because they know that your goal is to operate a business, not keep QuickBooks, right? And so, but then they sell you the products incrementally based on your short-term, mid-term, long-term goals. They don't come out with loans to you. They come out with just, here, we'll show you how much money you have. Then when they're watching their money, oh, we can offer you this line of credit and you want to keep operating your business and get out of the way. Oh, we can add payroll so that you don't have to spend all the time doing payroll. So this can be built into all of your products, and it's that like what we're selling in everything, which is think incrementally about solving the problem, think incrementally about attacking a customer segment, think incrementally about growing your business. And each of you, this is relevant for Modo, Numi, Compost, and Zero Trafficking. This is relevant for all of you. And so understanding really what they want to get done is the final vision, holding that out there, and then actually selling it to them incrementally, develop products that walk them incrementally towards that final goal. And this is another one where you're going to start with intuition on what it is. And as much as you can make that intuition explicit based on feedback from your actual customers, that's better. But let's start with where you are and see how far we can go on making it explicit.
Yeah. So it's very interesting that as we think about goals and how do we deliver, like, so understand, as we said before, understanding short-term, mid-term, long-term goals, we can understand how we're going to maintain the delivering of value over the life of the customer, to the customer, which will then extend the lifetime value of the customer, which means more money for you, right?
And I think here it's also important, sorry, Kyle,
No,
it's
go ahead.
important to be honest. So we might want to like read our goals into our customers. So like Sam, we might say the long-term goal is their long-term goal is to end trafficking, but that may not be it. The guy you're selling to, his long-term goal may be to get an award locally, or like, and Modo, it might be that we want their long-term goal to be like changing the fashion industry, but it may be having like the coolest clothes and most Instagram followers, and so it's helpful and actually important to be as honest as you can about what those goals are, so that you understand your customer all the way.
Good.
And doesn't it have to be driven? I mean, everything we put down that's not tied to direct information we've got back from a customer is a hypothesis and a guess. You know, we've got to get out in the building, get outside the building and actually prove this and test this to make sure we've got it captured correctly.
Yeah, it's way better. I mean, anything that's not spoken to you from your customer should be written like with a little asterisk next to it. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it can be a very good guess, because in some instances you all are the customers. Like, so for Morgan, you and your friendship circle, all we're saying is like, let's support that. Let's prove that to ourselves, what we think is out there, because it's even easier then. It's just a couple questions away. Like, all we got to do.
Yeah, definitely don't get, be honest with it. And the other thing is, you know, we talk about friendship circles, and I understand what you mean by that, but, you know, like friends and family can even be detrimental. I mean, they could be the greatest level of support and encouragement for your business, but, you know, at the same time, they will not they will sometimes hold things back because they just love you, right? They want to see you be successful. Like, you can just do it, just keep going, you know.
But I tell you, that coffee, when I started our first coffee shop like 10 years ago, I was in there and I was standing behind the counter serving coffee, and it was like the third independent coffee shop in Orlando. It was like we landed at just the right time, right? And in a new wave of coffee shops. And so I knew it ought to work. It was designed right. The story of the coffee was right. I just knew intuitively this is the right time. And then I had hired the target demographic besides myself. So me and my best friend were behind the counter. And I looked at the shop and I thought, this is never going to work because only my friends are coming in here. And I can't even get all my friends to come in here because they work during the day or whatever. And then I looked again. I realized I had 4 friends hanging out in the coffee shop at that time. I just remember it. And they all had bought coffee. And I was like, well, my friends count. Like, so I just need more friends. So I just started making friends with everybody that came in the coffee shop. So I think that friendship circles, you can launch a business on friendship circles, especially if you are good at making friends. And Susan and Morgan, you seem like people who be good at making friends. Pick the type of people, set the parameters, and make lots of friends. But then gather information about them so you can go speak back to them what they want to hear.
Yeah, and he's correct. And then I add, it's also nice to be able to sell stuff to people who aren't your friends. That's when you really know you're onto something, when you can sell something to someone who's not a friend.
Just make friends with everybody.
Hey, both are true. Hold them both in your hands. All right. Okay, let's jump to this one. So the goals, short-term goals, this to the typical buyer's journey. So the typical buyer's journey, let me just check the time here. We got 20 minutes. The typical buyer's journey is like, the important thing is we have to figure out how to get, like, customers just don't land on our doorstep, right? There's a process that we deploy, or a strategy that we deploy, which ultimately provides them with the right types of information at the right time that gets them to our door, and then or educates them so that way when they're ready to make a purchase decision, then they come to us, and then they go through and they make a purchase. And so with this here, it's just like, what content can you provide to help more people discover your product or service, right? So, and then what content can you provide to help them research your product like yours? So we're talking about like if you have a product and like what would make it, I had a boss when I worked in corporate America years and years ago, who once said to me, sales is all about, like, first you got to find the people, obviously, and then you have to educate them. But in the process, you have to remember that everybody's resistance is on high. Nobody really wants to be sold, right? And so our job is to lower their anxiety, right? Because they don't want to be sold, and then there's all kind of decisions that come into the play, like, am I getting, like in Ben's case, like, am I getting the real price, right? The best, fairest price. And so you want to feel confident in that, right? The person wants to feel confident in that, or can I trust this person or the quality of their work? And so what this is talking about specifically is like, in the middle one is, what content can you provide to help them research your product like yours? Is like if you can point and point them to things that help them to gain clarity and to ultimately help them to alleviate anxieties or resistance to purchase a product, like, that's in your benefit. So some companies do it by pointing people to articles and research, or customer testimonials, or ratings and reviews become really important, right? I go on Amazon and I look at stuff, and the first thing I do is, like, people who don't have reviews, I don't even want to deal with them. But if a company provided me with reviews, then it would make me feel more comfortable about making a purchase, right? So what company does that the best, right? And so that's how you need to look at the middle one. And then the other one is, what content can you provide to help them make their final decision to purchase? It's like, think about, like, what is it that you need to help get them over the curve? And so addressing these are really important. And then these bottom ones, like, in which we'll talk about in a second, is like, understanding these will help you determine like what content needs to be provided, because you'll understand the challenges, you'll understand the objections, and you'll understand what fears that they have around the purchasing the products or services. Does that make sense? Ben, you want to add anything to that?
No, that's right.
Okay, cool. So with 15 minutes left, let's look at daily challenges, common objections, and biggest fears. So as it relates to your product or service, daily challenges, you want to make sure that you are saying are explicitly getting what the customer is saying is a challenge, right, to them. It could be, so it's like what's causing the problem for them, or not allowing them to live their best life, right? So understanding those challenges, and then understanding, well, what are the objections that they have when it comes to purchasing a product or service? So the objection is, when I'm looking for a trash can that dispenses wipes, is like, well, one of the objections is, if I don't see reviews, like I don't like I'm not sure if you're legit, right? So like that's one of my objections. Like the challenge that keeps me, the thing I object is that you're not providing me reviews or enough information for me to make a comfortable decision, which then leads me to my biggest fear. My biggest fear is I fear getting ripped off, or I fear getting something that is inferior quality, right? I fear either losing my money completely, or I fear not getting the best quality, or getting the quality I expect for my money, right? And so understanding the challenges, the objections, and the biggest fears are going to be very important, because no matter what, you have to address these things somehow in your language. So if my biggest fear is around quality of service, or getting ripped off, or being scammed, then if you're the vendor is trying to sell me something, you need to make me feel comfortable with parting with my cash around those areas. So you need to provide solutions to those fears for me. Either you're providing reviews, or you're providing an escrow account, you're providing me with references, whatever it is. But like I said, like understanding and exposing challenges, objections, and fears is going to be very important in the process. Any questions?
So one of the things we've encouraged people to do in the past is just like put together a little questionnaire. Like it's easy to do with Google Drive or SurveyMonkey, and then construct the questions around this information that you want to gather, and guide the respondent as little as possible, but give them as many multiple choice, so that you can sort the answers rather than fill in the blank where everyone answers differently. But give them lots of choices in all of them, so you're not directing them towards answers. And so that to Sam's point earlier, when you start to go around their daily challenges, you're building it on what they tell you their challenges are.
Yeah. So you're like literally, he says like SurveyMonkeys or Google Forms or whatever. It's like you can create. Actually, we'll talk about that in a second. Let me just go over these last two really quickly. Change expectation. Before I move past daily challenge, common objection, biggest fears, you can see how in this the way that you deliver the product and talk about it, and the value proposition is found within these three, right? Like these three areas, and it's also found in change expectations, because the question is, it's like, if somebody is with change expectations, like what do they expect if they engage your product or service? What change do they expect? Do they expect things to be cheaper? Like a decrease in costs? Do they expect to get better educated so they can get a job? Do they expect their life? Like what? So you need to ask enough questions to be able to understand, well, what's the expectation? Because if you don't know what the expectation is, you can't create a value proposition that resonates with them. You'll be shooting in the dark, right? So for example, with me in the Learn Jelly product, is that clearly if a K-5 teacher, the expectation is that the thing that they wanted the most is to help their kids learn how to read. And if their kids are going to engage a product, that product had to help help them in that process, so to better comprehend or become better spellers or whatever. But unless I know that reading is important and the expectation is that the student will have a better comprehension level, then I wouldn't be able to create a value proposition that said, we help students improve their reading, learning, and thinking skills, right? So I wouldn't be able to say that, and I wouldn't be able to and then in terms of the product development, like I wouldn't know to develop my product with a high emphasis around reading comprehension, right? And to point to and to use rigors and point to research that helps lead my buyer down a journey to show that yes, I can do that I can make this change occur. So, for example, with me, visualization became a scientific concept that all teachers are familiar with. That is critical in helping kids improve their reading comprehension. I embedded a lot of visualization within the product, and I pointed to that research, and I talked about it constantly within my product, right? Because I knew that if teachers saw that and they saw that, then they knew that they knew that this product would help, and that I knew that I was talking about.
So the Learn Jelly example is a really good example because other tech products that had tried to move into the classroom sold the value of the tech product, but just ignored that the teachers were the ones that were going to have to implement it and use it, and they weren't trained or particularly cared about tech. They were evaluated based on how kids scored on tests. And so when Learn Jelly pivoted and sold, we'll help the kids learn the material they need to learn to perform well on tests and deliver what the teacher wants, then it became a valuable thing, and it would change. The tech was a tool to get what the teacher wanted, right? And this is really critical in all of your stuff, Sam, like understanding really, we talked about educating the police department on a different way to solve the problem. But understanding really what they're judged on and making sure we're speaking in a way that they are able to receive is really important. Same motto with when we're thinking about fashion designers and creators. They may have aspirations about their ethical line, but really they need to be able to sell it to a certain sort of person, right? And so you may have to make your ethical sourcing a subset of a value creation for them, where now their garments are worth something for several reasons. One of them is the ethical way that we produce it. And so I think that understanding these kind of objections and stuff is going to be really, really key, and to, getting out of our guesses on what those are, but learning how to talk to them in their language with their goals.
Yeah. And then the last one is purchase criteria. Like what are the 3 to 5 most important factors when making a buying decision? So every product is different, but with every product there are factors that have to be ticked off for the person to make a decision. It could be the color, it could be the way it's delivered, it could be the cost, it could be the quality, it could be the credibility, it could be the science. Like, so the point that that's being made here is that you should understand what are the critical purchasing criteria, that if they were to go down a list and check them off, then it will increase the likelihood of them engaging or purchasing your product. And you should know these without a shadow of doubt. So, for example, Ben and I have this co-working space. We know that our purchasing criteria is one is helping them understand a very good sense of community. We understand that that's a very important factor. The other thing we know is an important factor is cost, right? And location. But even more, and this is one that I kind of fought against because it felt so trivial to me, but I realize it is very critically important, is the fact that we have free parking. The fact that a co-working space has free parking because people want to be downtown, and the biggest expense that they have is parking. And to understand that this free parking, if cost is a major factor in it, and you add parking into it, becomes even more important that you address parking. And so by accepting that that was an important criteria, now I have to talk about free parking because I know cost is an important driver. And so therefore, to say we have a community, we have our prices are competitive, and by the way, we're downtown and we have free parking, are the purchase criteria that people are checking off as they make a decision on whether or not to engage us or not, and increases the likelihood of them engaging if we can address those areas. So each of you will have your own little area, but you need to know these without a shadow of a doubt about your product, right? Like what that list is that leads to a sale.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say about this is that just my personality, when I start looking at this stuff, it feels like cold and kind of transactional. But what I've learned in talking to some of our rally makers who've been very senior in companies and are enamored with understanding their customer, it can be a place of real empathy. So I want to encourage you all to think about putting yourself in the shoes of the person who's buying buying your product, and allowing yourself to empathize with their life, their challenges, their problems, and recognize that your product has a real solution there if you can speak to them. I tried this once at a coffee shop, the one we have at the hospital, that I felt like wasn't performing the way that it ought to. It was in a hospital location. There were thousands of people in the proximity of it all the time, and it just didn't have the volume. And so what I did was I really believed that people want to be part of something larger than themselves. And when you challenge people to name their price and remind them that every time they buy a cup of coffee, they're caught up in a supply chain that's making an impact on the world, that can be an experience of being a part of something larger than yourself, making a choice to have an impact. But that my baristas were ill-trained and weren't doing a very good job at all at explaining that. And that story wasn't anywhere in the coffee shop. So when they came into our shop, it was like the gift shop with worse coffee was easier, even though it was more expensive, but it was just the same. It was like a few distance steps different. So then I reinforced that message and said, this is empathizing that they're on their break and they want to feel a part of something larger than themselves. How do I make sure that they get that experience? And put the messages up inside the shop on big banners and words, retrained the baristas, gave them collateral to hand to drive home the message. And now understanding my customer, rather than only just being enamored with my product and knowing it does something, understanding my customer and their experience of that product helped me sell more. And the traffic went up in that year over 25% from the year before, right? Just by understanding and empathizing with the customer. And
I think you did another thing that was interesting, Ben. I think that you're leaving out is that in the whole empathy thing, like you realize this is a hospital. These are people who need to get back to patients, have emergencies and things like that. And you watch people queue up, right? They would it would be like it was one barista there who was making this coffee well crafted, and you added a second person in because you wanted to make it faster for them because you understood that you need to get them back. Right.
Yeah, it was needed a different feel and flow than the other coffee shops where it's a community hangout space. This one they needed to keep moving, and so we staffed it a little bit differently. All in just trying to understand their experience. And what motivated me to understand their experience was wanting to deliver the value that I felt like they had, which they could have an experience of making an impact in the world by naming their price for a cup of coffee at our shop, and they were getting robbed of that experience. I wasn't delivering that product to them, and so they weren't coming back. And that same kind of altruistic mission is in the heart of all of you. But if we don't do this work of empathizing with our customer, we'll miss opportunities to deliver that work.
So guys, and when I say guys, it's gender neutral. So this customer persona is like, you can see how important it is, like the power of it. And if you spend time there, it will allow you to deliver that product. It will allow you to deliver value to the customer that will help them make the purchase over and over again. It will allow you to get to a place where you're sustainable. It will allow you to get to a place where you're having an impact, right? Because also there's another component of this is that hopefully as people buy more and more of your stuff, your impact increases. It unlocks that entire canvas that at least the first 2/3 of it, right? It unlocks all of that. And so the encouragement that we have is that you spend time on this, you develop one for all you believe is your customer sets, and try to get it out there. Either you're doing focus groups, either you're sending out surveys, but the key is you want to do enough of that work so that the more information you have, the better. Like if I have 1 or 2 points, okay, but if I have thousands of points and I see that this nice little blip is forming in the middle, then I start to feel better about that. So the more information you have about your customer, which means that you got to get out you got to get insight from as many people as possible, the more comfortable you're going to be about how you develop your product, how you move it forward. And the better your product's going to be, obviously, as a result of that work. So I think we're out of time, but yeah, good stuff. And, hopefully this was helpful for you folks.